Amelia shut the car door with a satisfying clunk and surveyed the building before her. It loomed against a grey sky, its chipped exterior and water-stained walls speaking of a history best left unspoken. This was her new start, a place where the ghosts of her past couldn't follow. At least that's what she told herself. Dragging her luggage across the cracked pavement, Amelia glanced at the towering windows. She caught the briefest flicker of movement, a shadow darting across a window 3 floors up. She shivered. The building had a peculiar stillness to it, as if it were holding its breath. Inside, the air was damp and carried the faint scent of mildew. The hallway was dimly lit, and her footsteps echoed in the emptiness. The property manager, a wiry man named Mr. Gorman, handed her the keys with a polite yet hurried demeanor. "Your unit's on the 3rd floor," he said. "Elevator's been out 4 years, so it's stairs 4 now." Amelia nodded, hefting her suitcase. The stairs creaked underfoot, and by the time she reached her door, she was winded. Her apartment was small but functional. It smelled faintly of fresh paint, an attempt to mask the decay that permeated the building. By the time she unpacked, exhaustion weighed her down. Amelia drifted to sleep, the creaks of the building settling into a rhythm that almost sounded like whispers. That night, she woke to a draft. Her bedroom door was open, and down the hall, the stairwell door stood ajar. Amelia frowned. She distinctly remembered closing it. Approaching cautiously, she peeked inside. The stairwell yawned into an impossible abyss. Where there should have been 5 floors, the stairs spiraled downward endlessly. A faint, echoing whisper drifted up. "Hello." Her voice trembled as it broke the silence. The whispering ceased. She slammed the door shut and hurried back to her room. Sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, the stairwell door was closed, its frame as unassuming as any other in the building. Amelia tried to brush off her unease. Over the following days, small incidents piled up. The door was always ajar when she passed it, though she could swear she hadn't touched it. Her neighbors avoided the topic when she mentioned it. Even Mr. Gorman dismissed her concerns with a curt, "Just an old building. Doors stick sometimes." One evening, Amelia heard her name whispered softly, coming from the stairwell. She froze mid-step, her pulse quickening. She debated whether to look or lock herself inside her apartment. Against her better judgment, she crept toward the door and opened it. A photograph lay on the top step. It was of her brother, smiling the way he had before the accident. Her breath hitched. She hadn't seen that photo in years. That night, the whispers were louder. Compelled by a mix of dread and curiosity, Amelia stepped into the stairwell, her phone's flashlight guiding her. She descended cautiously, the air growing colder with each step. She reached a landing that shouldn't exist. A single door stood ajar, revealing a room bathed in dim, flickering light. Inside, her breath caught. An unfinished painting of her brother stood in the center of the room. It was a piece she had abandoned years ago, after his death. She stepped closer, heart pounding. As she reached for the canvas, the painted eyes shifted, locking onto hers with an accusatory glare. Amelia stumbled back, dropping her phone. The room plunged into darkness, and the whispers surged around her, now sharp and mocking. She fled up the stairs, bursting back into her apartment. She didn't sleep that night. The next day, Amelia resolved to uncover the truth about the stairwell. An elderly neighbor named Mrs. Porter seemed the most approachable. When Amelia mentioned the strange occurrences, the woman's face paled. "You need to leave," Mrs. Porter said. "That stairwell, it's not right. It's taken people before, feeds on grief, they say. Whatever you do, don't go back." Amelia pressed for details, but the woman grew agitated, muttering prayers as she retreated to her apartment. Her curiosity only deepened. In the building's dusty basement, she found old maintenance logs and photos. The stairwell had always been there, even when the building was renovated decades ago. Tenants had reported strange occurrences over the years. Disappearances, whispers, visions. Amelia's hands trembled as she closed the file. She wasn't imagining things. Unable to resist the pull of the stairwell, Amelia descended again. This time, the walls seemed to pulse, alive with movement. She found another room, its floor covered in broken glass. At the center was her brother's wrecked car, its frame twisted and burnt. She saw herself reflected in the shards, blood smeared across her hands. "It was your fault," a voice hissed. "You killed him." Amelia collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face. She screamed into the void, but the whispers only laughed. When she finally stumbled back to her apartment, hours had passed, though she swore she'd only been gone minutes. Her grip on reality began to fray. When Amelia tried to leave the building, she found herself inexplicably back inside. No matter how far she walked, she returned to her apartment door. Realizing she had no choice, she confronted the stairwell. This time, the door opened before she touched it, welcoming her. She descended deeper than ever, encountering shadowy figures, tenants who had been consumed by the stairwell. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow. "Help us," they begged, reaching for her. But as she moved, their expressions twisted into rage. "This is your fault," she ran, their wails echoing behind her. At the lowest level, Amelia found herself back at the scene of the accident. She sat in the driver's seat of her car, headlights illuminating the curve where she had swerved. The scene replayed endlessly, her brother's voice calling out, "Watch out." This time, she didn't fight it. She let the memory wash over her, confronting her guilt head-on. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears streaming. "I didn't mean to. I was scared." The whisper softened. Her brother's apparition appeared, his face serene. "I forgive you," he said. The stairwell began to collapse, the walls folding inward. Amelia ran, her path illuminated by a faint light. Amelia woke on the sidewalk outside the building. She looked back to find it intact, but the stairwell door was gone. She moved out the next day, vowing to rebuild her life. Her paintings took on a darker, more introspective tone, but she found solace in her work. Yet, in quiet moments, she still heard whispers, faint and far away. Elsewhere, a new tenant stared at the wall where the stairwell used to be, feeling a draft and hearing something faint, something calling.